Alright, round three, and easy mulligan. I said easy mulligan, and easy keep. We're on the draw, and our opponent is also going down to 6. And so we see Remand on the top of our deck. And with this hand, I think keeping Remand is a little risky. Just in case you're spending your mana casting your spells in the early game and then you end up missing your third land drop, it's better to just basically cycle the Remand right now and put it on the bottom. And see, we drew Mana Leak, which is going to play a similar role as Remand anyways, although it turns out our opponent is getting rid of our Mana Leaks, so the Remand could have been useful, but it still basically cycled itself closer to a land anyways. And our opponent's on Abzan, obviously, at this point, and gets down a Liliana, which we can deal with right now. So Anger of the Gods is going to be fairly useless, except against Lingering Souls, and we already have Electrolyze for that. So I decide to keep my Torrential Gearhulk, just in case I draw a land, kill off the Liliana, and then make it up to Torrential Gearhulk mana. And here, I'm actually fine if Liliana pluses. I'm fine getting rid of one of these cards for one of my opponent's cards, pretty much no matter what it is. But instead, our opponent's plan is to empty their hand and then plus Liliana, which means I'm going to kill the Liliana now, which we can do while Scavenging Ooze is on the stack. And we're at a healthy life total. We're only 4 lands away from Torrential Gearhulk, and the only threat right now is Shambling Vent, which is pretty good. I mean, this is how we want games against Abzan to go. For us to not fall too far behind in the beginning and then start card advantaging our way to the finish line. Alright, an Inquisition gets rid of the Serum Visions, which would have been great. And lands aren't terrible, since they mean we're getting up to Torrential Gearhulk. And the beatdown continues, which, I mean, our opponent hasn't drawn a threat, which is great. Appreciate that, opponent. So we double cycle on Mishra's Bauble. And Mana Leak is a terrible draw, but I mean, it's still possible we get value out of it. Like, we could have prevented a Shambling Vent attack there by Mana Leaking, but decide to keep it. Just in case it is actually able to counter something. And Torrential Gearhulk. So our opponent has 0 cards, and why would anyone ever expect Torrential Gearhulk? And unfortunately, our opponent did expect Torrential Gearhulk because they didn't activate Shambling Vent and attack with it. So it's possible. I mean, I was streaming this at the time, so it's possible I was possible I was getting ghosted. And Ajani is going to buy us some time as well. Unfortunately, we are still going to be taking hits. And we scry into a bunch of good stuff. Cryptic commands and paths. So lots of gas, which is perfect. This is a really long game, so sorry if I'm speeding through it. And decide to mana leak just to tap our opponent out in case they had another mana to attack a Ajani with Shambling Vents. We didn't want that to happen. And we can hardcast Commandeer. The dream is alive of stealing like a Liliana. Instead, just the Lingering Souls is what we have to settle it for. And I think I have to Cryptic that because otherwise we're just losing too hard on board. And here I make a mistake attacking with both spirits. My reasoning being that I can path a Shambling Vent before it kills a Ajani, but there's even just an Inquisition destroys that plan. So I should have valued my Ajani's life higher than I did. An opponent has Scavenging Ooze, which is just a higher priority target than Shambling Vent, so I can't even path Shambling Vent anymore. Since I need to get rid of Scavenging Ooze if I have any hope of winning with, like, Torrential Gearhulk. And here opponent actually activated both Shambling Vents and kept up path. And we draw a bit more land. And these Shambling Vents have dealt us a lot of damage this game. Probably being a bit too aggressive with my spirits. I should have considered chumping by now. Before we got into collective brutality, Siege Rhino range. Alright, so we need an answer, and we find a great answer. Actually an answer for both of these. In theory. And it works. And another Snapcaster is great. So now I'm worried about actual ways to win the game. I have basically Colonnades and Snapcaster mages since I'm out of Torrential Gearhulks. So I mean, I just am hoping my opponent doesn't draw anything. Unfortunately, all our Cryptics are exiled. And now we have a clock. Unfortunately, our Snapcasters immediately get pulsed. And Anafenza is an issue. But our deck is... We've thinned out most of the lands from the deck, so there's a good chance we draw answers at any given point in time. Like another Cryptic command. Unfortunately, we're 1 mana short from countering the Anafenza. And we can Spell Snare Tarmogoyf. And there, finally, the answer to Anafenza. 2 Cryptic commands. And I can just leave up Colonnade to threaten blocking the Hierarch, or Helix it if it attacks, which is a nice part to Vigilance. But I just get rid of it there anyways, just to be safe, since I'm at 1 life. And can start attacking with both Colonnades. And I'm at 6 cards left in library, but the colonnade train is chugging along. And Liliana. Now, normally killing a Liliana on 4 loyalty is the best thing a colonnade can do, but right now there's more important things to be doing. And Lingering Souls is one of the few ways to actually buy enough time for us to deck. But Electrolyze just ends the game. And Snapcaster ends the game. And that was a long game. 2 cards left in library. So, for sideboarding against Abzan, the dream is commandeering like a Liliana, but I mean, that's just unrealistic. Unfortunately, Commandeer has not proven itself to be the MVP in Jeskai. So Anger is not so great. Again, it's only good against Lingering Souls, and the counter magic is not great, and Bolt is surprisingly ineffective a lot of the time, but we saw Noble Hierarch, which makes Bolt much better. As for what we want out of the sideboard, we for sure want Is It Staticaster. On the play, we probably want Shadow of Doubt, but on the draw, it's somewhat iffy, especially since they can see the cards in your hand. I think I may have brought it in, but I don't think it's worth it to bring it in. So we for sure want all this. Relic to get rid of Lingering Souls, and Shrink, Grimflare, and Tarmogoyf. Explosives is great answer to pretty much everything. And Negate's okay. I think probably Remand or Mana Leak might be better. It's difficult to say though. It depends. I think on the draw you probably want, I would say, 2 Mana Leaks and a Negate. So I would side out that and side in that. Alright, great opener for game 2. And yeah, it immediately drew Shadow of Doubt on the draw, which should not have been in the deck. See, our opponent Inquisitioned it first off, and second off, they're not even playing Zac lands. And by Inquisitioned it, I mean saw we had it through Inquisition. But it does cycle. And we drew 2 Negates, which, again, I talked about in sideboarding, but I said I favored Mana Leaks a bit more, but I put in the 2 Negates, which I think was a mistake. Like, for this hand specifically, it would be much better to have the split rather than the hard counter, although Mana Leak can be terrible in the late game. It's great in the early game a lot of the time for just buying time against Lilianas or whatever. And we kind of have the soft answer to Grimflare. Not a very good answer though, since Grimflare filters the draws and our opponent keeps 1 card on top. And I should have pathed the Grimflare immediately because our opponent knew they wanted a card on top, but I missed that, I believe. It would be worth giving them the land versus denying a scry, potentially. So this looks okay. We have Negates, our opponent knows it, and their Strike Tusk, which ruins our day. And even Relic is not doing well because we don't want to pop it, since we want to get value off Torrential Gearhulk. Or the Snapcaster that we drew. So Brutality we negate since I don't actually know why we negated that. If it was just cast for its 1 mode, we could have just let that resolve it would have given our opponent a little bit more information, but it would have saved us 2 mana. So I think just letting it resolve would have probably been a bit better, although we don't really need that mana, except for extra negates. So actually, yeah, that was a huge misplay, not letting that resolve, since we could have negated that surgical extraction. But instead we had to relic our own path in response to the surgical extraction. So that was a little misplay that may have cost us big. See, another negate target. And here we're hoping for something big from Sphinx's Revelation. Unfortunately, our opponent has Gideon. You know, it might have been possible to pull this game out, even though it's looking unwinnable from this point, if we had have been able to negate something relevant, but instead we're just dead. Dead. Alright, so game 3, another good opener. Clearly I wasn't playing 100% optimally. And unfortunately, Inquisition hits a target. Always feels good when an Inquisition whiffs, and always feels terrible when your only target is Sphinx's Revelation. Because it's like, why Sphinx's Revelation? Why do you cost 3? Alright, we path that. Don't want to enable all sorts of shenanigans, from Lingering Souls to just getting Delirium. Alright, we're still not in a terrible spot. We're up to Cryptic Command. Cryptic Command is surprisingly good against Liliana. Bouncing it just end of turn is pretty good. Or in response to a expensive creature. That's worth it for a bounce. And we drew the answer to the other part of Lingering Souls. Or Grimflare. And then 2 lands gets us up to Colonnade mana. Fortunately, our opponent is going to bait out the Cryptic and then make some spirit tokens. Now we actually wanted to wait on the Staticaster because we knew our opponent had Liliana of the Veil. So we didn't want to play Staticaster, ping the spirits, and then let our opponent minus to kill the Staticaster, because we're going to be using this Colonnade to kill Liliana anyways. So whether we want it to be on 4 loyalty rather than 1, and us not having a Staticaster. And our opponent even didn't attack first, so we didn't have to take any extra damage at all. So that worked out nicely. And now we have a tricky dilemma because we drew Snapcaster Mage. So we could activate Colonnade and swing into Liliana of the Veil and attempt to kill it. And if we noticed, our opponent only attacked with 1 Lingering Souls token. So if they had Path to Exile, they may have attacked with 2 Lingering Souls tokens, planning on pathing Celestial Colonnade. So the issue was I was pressed for time, so I just decided to go for the, I have to kill off my opponent quickly, so I decided it was likely they didn't have Path since they only attacked with 1 Lingering Souls token, and decided this would be much faster than tapping out for Snapcaster. I think the correct play, though, is just leave up Snapcaster Mage, because if our opponent minuses, that's fine. If our opponent pluses, we can play Snapcaster and target Cryptic Command and not discard anything, and then just bounce Liliana end of turn. So I think that would have been the optimal play, but we were pressed for time. And even had reason to believe that there wasn't Path to Exile in our opponent's hand. By the way, there's Path to Exile in our opponent's hand. Which means we lost our Snapcaster Mage for free, and that basically cost us the game. And Relic is fine, it at least cycles. And we're just blocking Shambling Vent, and finally find a Colonnade, which potentially puts us in a good spot. Again, we're low on time. And another Colonnade isn't terrible. Unfortunately, Liliana was on 5. And then another one drawn gets rid of our Staticaster. Okay, so we finally dealt with Liliana. Unfortunately, our opponent has Fulminator Mage, which is a great answer to these Colonnades. And then Anafenza is basically going to seal the deal when we haven't drawn a good answer for it. You can buy time, though. But Thragtusk is going to further cement our chances of winning in cement. Commandeer. I guess we were trying out Commandeer too. Oh my god, we could have commandeered Gideon if we only had 7 more mana or 2 more blue cards. And we're at 2 seconds left, so we decide to take the noble death of dying by damage when we have 2 seconds left on the clock.